Just in front of the camera. Just put your hand in front of the camera. At least here we can see. Be careful, Bridget. What's his name?
Hi. Good evening. Welcome to the first Services and Dreams in 2016. Whoa. Just to make sure, we are not the woman Google meeting and neither the financial meetup. So if you think that you are in the wrong meeting, you still have the chance to leave or not, to just stay and enjoy. I think it'll be better.
Welcome. We are having a topic that I'm personally looking forward to since I think 1.5 years. It's about strategizing with services business logic. And it took us so long because it's quite an academic thingy we have been going through, and it was a pain in the last speaker. We had long nights, various long nights. One thing we are insanely curious about is who of you is a first timer? Who has never been to Services and Drinks?
And if it's the first time in the Services and Drinks, you know that you have to fight, right?
So briefly, just for those who haven't met us, so this is who we are normally here on stage. It's Katrin, Olga, Manuel, myself, Martin, Mauro. The others are just all abroad. They're just hanging out on the beach of Sydney or in cozy Madrid. So they can't be with us tonight. But we have all of you, which is great. So in a nutshell, the different formats we are actually doing with Service Design Berlin as an entity is, on the one hand, we have this format as we have it tonight. Then we have a different order here, that's funny. We have another thing started, which is a more private and more a smaller round. It's a Service Design dinner. We had this one during our conference as a dry run. So the main event, basically, or the biggest event, is the Service Experience Camp, which always takes place mid-November now. And the Service Design Drinks is sort of the smaller variant in a way, because it's as well interactive and what else more.
Yeah, so basically that's what we do when we're not working. So we try to fill the gaps of the community, try to bring the community together in this different variations of formats. I think each one of them, they kind of bring a different value. So this one is our touch point, is our recurring touch point with the community. And this one is the great show that we all get together there to share our sparks over the year with people from all over the world.
Keep talking.
Yeah. So So last year we had like 250 people sitting together in the Caucasian, and for 2 days. And for me, it was like one of the best days last year's that I had. And the formats are kind of very like we try to always innovate in terms of format, because we believe that conferences are kind of boring, like watching and so like you're doing right now. So don't worry, like soon you're gonna be doing something. And we try to foster that like every time. So if you have more suggestions how we could make this community get more engaged together, we are like, you know, our telephone number, you can find it as easily and everywhere. So you can always hit us with suggestions.
Yeah, and then in parallel, as Mo said, like we're always exploring new formats. So one other format we were just doing for the conference was actually our first printed newspaper. So now we have it digitally with a few copies left. So if you ask nicely, we will give you one of the last copies. But yeah, so and then right now we're all about like starting to plan again the next conference for November, and there will be more announcements very soon. Yeah, so some might have attended. I sense.
Yeah, actually, you gave a great revelation at the Jam on this weekend. But Adam gonna tell more about that.
Right, and Adam as well will tell more about the place we are at. And Adam, I was quite fascinated when Adam at some point was like, yeah, I'm gonna get this new job, and like it has a very special title. It's called Hospitality Service Design. I was like, wow, I want to hear more about that. So maybe please tell us.
Yeah, the job title is it was like, you know, when they ask you to fill out the business card, it's like, what do you want on your business card? It's like, yeah. So that's how it came about. Anyway, so I'm a service designer at the factory. It's the clicker. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. As you can see, factory is this building that you're in. It's not the dark basement only, but we do have lots of members and a really amazing, that's me again. Apologies to the brand team. Sorry, I skipped over me because I'm not that interested. So yes, we are a space in Berlin, but actually we like to, as the service designers here, call ourselves an opportunity space, because what's a physical artifact without its touch points? We also have a really good community here, and we help that community to have impact in their lives and whatever they do. So obviously the service changes depending on who the person is that comes here. How? Yeah, so we provide a full service environment. I love saying that to service designers. That's such a cool thing. You guys get that. So we really try to hit every touch point, every kind of like communication, message, brand, event. You know, we try to all do it in the same kind of meaning, and that's what we really hit here with our community, and that's what we hope to build better and better, of course. Round and round feedback, you know, this kind of way. Yeah, and we do it all for the sake of collaboration. So getting one person to meet another, bringing people together, bringing us as service designers here, bringing members like Uber and SoundCloud here to meet service designers and get better services. Because the world needs better services, don't they? Anyway, so how do we do service design? We found out that actually what matters most here is not just the office space, but the people space. And so we really enjoy working with people. And that's something that we really focus on here. Do lots of user research and mobile ethnography. Use WhatsApp, you know, it's cool. Yeah, so then we, that's why I'm a hospitality service design, because we play hosts. And that's what we really like to do for our members. But we don't like to do it for them, we like to do it with them. And thank you. Yeah, massive pleasure to be here.
And then in a nutshell, what Mo already teased. So we're gonna have an input. Jan is gonna come on stage in a second. Then we're gonna have an exercise. And I know some people really like that and some don't. So just don't skip that. But like it always makes sense to have all the knowledge you just put in your head, like try it out with your hands, right? So and the other benefit of doing exercises is you actually work together with people you don't know, and then like it's a conversation starter. So we have seen like people throughout the little exercise, like talking to people they wouldn't have talked because they were coming with their colleagues and so on and so on. So often the exercise is like an icebreaker. And then if there's still some beer left, then mingle with more. And we're as well broadcasting globally. So Mauro has the camera set up, and like, yeah. So you can, if you are not getting all the details in this very moment now, you can rewatch it as well on our YouTube channel later.
Hi, Mom.
So, and one more slide before I hand over to Jan. So this is as well dear to me. So we started. So this is actually our 5th year now with Service Design Degrees, and I think in the first, say, 15 months or so, we've been in the first 15 months we've been looking really into like methods and tools, like looking into business modeling, looking into service blueprinting, and so on. So we started like discussing techniques mainly. And then since 2013 or so, we looked into fields of application. So looking to service design in startup, service design in retail, service design in banking, service design for events. So we've been shifting a bit the fields. And then there's this really helpful chart from one researcher I'm friends with, and he's describing design thinking and as well related service design thinking, as you might say, in these different layers. And so we've been hanging out for quite a while in this space and like talking about practices in different contexts. But today we would like to go into a higher level, talking about principles, overarching principles that are really applicable like for all these contexts. And this is why this took quite a bit of time, and this is why it's exciting, I think. So, please welcome Jan Schmiedgen. So, Jan is not at all a first-timer either. So, Jan was already joining Service Design Drinks in 2013, where he was giving a really great introduction to the business model canvas, because he was actually a co-creator of Alexander Osterwalder's business model generation book back in the days. And today he's a research fellow in the HBI Stanford, I have to read that, HBI Stanford Design Thinking Research Program, where he just finished like a very big study on the application of the design thinking in big organizations and how it's developing. And yeah, tonight he had the extra challenge of us asking him to cut the content like crazy. So some people who are like very familiar with this topic, might be very few only, but oh, there's stuff missing. Yes, there will be stuff missing. So we had to boil it down, and now it's your stage. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Before I start, I have a little question to you guys. Who of you is from the industry, let's say the manufacturing industry or mechanical engineering or something like this, typical German industry? Okay. Oh, very good. Some guys over there. And who of you is working in service design and doing consulting work, these kinds of things? Aha, okay. So you're actually the wrong audience. Because I should be talking to these guys. Because I think especially the German export world champions, they would need kind of these inputs, because some of the things that I'm about to tell you will probably not be that new to you. So yeah, let's start. These guys from the industry were also the guys that drove two professors very crazy. And these professors are called Steve Vargo and Robert Lush. The one is from the University of Hawaii, the other one's from the University of Arizona. They are marketing and entrepreneurship professors. And they really hated the situation that all the time, if we talk about service, we usually refer to service or to a notion of service as activities. Just think of a restaurant service, a repair service, a maintenance service, transportation, call center, you name it. And this is why, over the course of time, they developed another perspective on that. They developed a perspective on service. We call it a lens, which is a perspective on business and marketing in general. And regardless of whether your core business is physical good or service activity. And this went on for 10 years now. And they also recently wrote a book about that. And this book is mainly the one by the same name that we will refer to tonight. But before we do so, let's take a step back and let's also see what different notions of service and service design circulate in the service design community, because that's also good to have that and put that into perspective. Because you need to know what service design is not about before I start. So, service design is not like an app. It's not about designing touch points. It's not about embedding touch points into customer journeys or experience journeys. It's also not about embedding a bunch of customer journeys in a business system. It's more about, and some people might be familiar with Birgit Mager's levels of service design, it's more about a strategic level of service where you use service as a lens to conceive your firm's core purpose, or where you define your market through a service lens. And moreover, these guys also strove to kind of break up the basic assumptions of neoclassical economics, because they said, oh, what you say is not right, we have a different stance on that. And this is really, really interesting, because if you subscribe to their worldview, you might have a guiding philosophy for your strategic thinking, because they basically ask, what are the fundamentals of economics and how is value creation really working? And to do so, they developed something they call the 10 foundational premises. It's this thing here. It's a centerpiece of their book. And 4 of those foundational premises, the ones up here, are and the axioms we will choose for this talk as a guiding structure, because you need to know them. Okay, what's an axiom? An axiom is a statement which is so evident and well established that it's accepted without controversy or question. That means it serves you as a starting point for reasoning and arguments if you subscribe to a certain school of thought. Oh my goodness, very academic. Let's walk through all of them. But I will do so when we walk through them by referring to 2 examples all the time. Example from your daily life, having a dinner with friends, and I will refer to Rolls-Royce, which I've chosen because it's a business-to-business example and a very industrial example. And I like that because we often claim that there's a shift to services right now, especially in the industry, but actually there is no shift to service. You will see that there's only a shift in thinking. Let's get started. I will walk you through the 4 axioms. They are here, very quickly. And be mindful, or you should note that they build on each other. So I might repeat myself at some point in points in time, and they are interdependent and so on. Okay, let's start. Imagine you want to have a good dinner with friends. What do you need for that? Lots of things, sure. But one thing you need all the time: music. A good, nice background music that brings up the mood, or down, depending on how you want it. So, for the past 100 years, this practice hasn't changed. So, maybe in past centuries, chamber musicians might have provided this service of bringing up or down the mood. But once we were able to record the service provision of the chamber musicians, we were able to store it in little devices and things. And their service provision got what Waage and Lasch called masked or embedded in a product. Can be the musical box, can be the gramophone, can be the CD-ROM. Nowadays, it's streaming. So what we can observe here is that things might change form. However, the service they render stays the same all the time. And this is why Waage and Lasch say series of exchanges are a mere distribution mechanism for service provision. And every product renders a service. Why? Because someone had to apply his knowledge and his skills to embed the service in the product. Just think the musicians, think the recording studio, and think the Spotify coders. Okay. Then they say, or then imagine, you have your friends there, and you choose your playlist. You have to curate the playlist. And then you have to find the right volume so that the mood is right. So that means suddenly you become a co-creator of value, second axiom. But you also have to integrate physical resources. For example, your power outlet, otherwise Spotify wouldn't work it, or your Denon Spotify super hi-fi amplifier. You also have to apply your own knowledge and skills of yourself and others. For example, your music knowledge to choose the right music and playlist, or you invite a DJ friend and he will choose the music this night. So you become a resource integrator, axiom-free. And now imagine you have your Denon high-end hi-fi system with you, and you go to the desert with your backpack, and you have it with you and a flute. Now, conventional wisdom would say, well, the Denon hi-fi amplifier system is more valuable than the flute. However, our normal use, if we talk about value or language use, if we talk about value, often equates value with worth, because what is meant here is the mere exchange value on the market. So in terms of money. However, the use value can be totally different, because they make music with that, so you rather use the flute. So the value in use or the value in context is way higher here. And if I talk in the following about value, I usually refer to value in context, because this is very important for SD logic. Okay, now I go through all the axioms in detail again, and tell you why they are important. First, I will say what is conventional wisdom, then I will say what SD logic says, and show you examples. Service is the fundamental basis of exchange. Why is that revolutionary? Well, you have to know, from a historical perspective, there has been an artificial separation of service and product/goods. Because we stored or inventoried or traded, they were regarded as inferior to products. So people had really big problems to define what actually a service is. And so they said one day, oh, a service is actually what a product is not. Or a service is a good which is intangible. Okay, problem solved. And so this led to a situation where we treat service now with the logic of goods, because we try to put services into packages, units of outputs. And these can be better exchanged. So the focus is again on the exchange value, easy transaction. Just think of standardized bed nights in hotels. And Vargo and Lach in their SD logic say, oh, that's not true. Service is not an intangible or type of good. Service is always exchanged for service. We are just not aware of the service nature of exchange. Let's take, for example, you and your employer. You go to your employer, apply your service, or your knowledge and skills. That means you render a service for your employer, Photoshop, whatever. Your employer sells a certain service to his client. The client gives back money. Money for Vargo and Lach is just service rights. This is how they frame it. And then you can go with that money, because some of that money trickles down to you, to a barber. And there you exchange the service rights for a service he provides you, the haircut. Okay, this is how they reason and argue. The problem is we are not very often aware of the service nature of exchange, because it's not always as apparent as with the barber. Because we have to use exchange vehicles or institutions, as they say, like money, organizations, and goods to render a service. Just think, for example, of a good. You take the scissor and provide the service yourself, because you don't have enough service rights to go to the barber, you know? So that means the service nature of exchange is masked. Okay, that's a daily life experience. Let's go to the business example. Why does it matter for business at all? Because if you think hard about the masked service nature of exchange, then you can think about how you might enable your users and customers from certain, enable or relieve your customers from certain activities. Job to be done, philosophy might be familiar with that. And Rolls-Royce did so with airline operators, because the airline operators, oh no, maybe I should explain it. That's the value proposition of Rolls-Royce, power by the hour. And what they do is the following. You don't buy the engine anymore. Rolls-Royce puts the engine on your plane, and only if the engine runs, and if you're in the sky, then you pay. So it's kind of a pay-per-use model. So that means power by the hour. So Rolls-Royce does not think about how to make it, the product, the engine better, they think about how to make the customer better in his self-service, because they have to make sure that the engine runs properly all the time. And what that means, I can show you with this table. In a goods dominant logic, where I think about the exchange only, the responsibility for you as a provider, as a service provider, ends with the transfer of ownership. In GD logic, you continuously have to understand the activities that create real value and use for the customer. For example, the first thing, component forecasting and provisioning. If you have statistical data from the engine when spare parts need to be replaced, you can do so proactively, so you increase engine uptime. If you can provide your customer with equipment configuration advice for operational and contextual capability, oh my goodness, just think, flying in the desert, flying in snow. Then you can enable airline operators again to prolong the uptime. And you learn from these extreme use cases, and then your customers and also the employees that learn together with your customers become your most important resource. Varga and Lush call it operant with a T, resources. If you would have had just a mere goods transaction, that would have led to a black box, because you don't know what the customer is doing, having problems with, and so on, because you would have done just self-repair. So if your customer interactions remain, you have a steep learning curve. You improve your products, you improve the service your product renders, and you discover new needs that the competition is not even aware of. By the way, the list is very long, very long. So products are just part of service, and service is the fundamental basis of exchange. Axiom 1. Axiom 2. The customer is always a co-creator of value. It starts with very simple things already, but first let's go to the business jargon. Maybe you know these situations. You're at a client and they say, oh, we have to create more value for the customer, and we will do so by adding certain features, and we have our value-added services here, and so on and so on. The list goes on. And these people usually have certain scripts in mind. They think their product or their good might be used in a certain way after the transaction is done. And there's lots of assumptions and wishful thinking in there. But the service customer render themselves or others can be completely different, can deviate from this script. And it even starts with most simple products, like for example, a stool or a whisk. Regarding the stool, this might be the value co-creation. Regarding the whisk, this might be the value co-creation. This is why the axiom says that enterprises can, and that's a bit, sounds a bit weird, that enterprises can only offer their applied resources for value creation and collaboratively create value in interaction. So that means the intended script of the initial value proposition might get accepted, but need not be. So firms cannot create value independently, and even for realizing the intended value proposition, customers have to integrate their own resources in the value creation process. Think IKEA, you need a screwdriver at least. Okay. And if you take a car, for example, someone who came here by car, you cannot realize the value of a car if you don't have a driver's license, if you don't know the rules, the STVZO, if you don't have the physical abilities, and so on. You know what I mean, guys. So, if you don't have all these resources, all these things, you will not arrive at time at the dinner party. And speaking of that, how do you realize the value of having a nice evening with friends? Well, you have to integrate resources again. A single product or service cannot do that on its own, even if its value proposition says so. So you integrate the value proposition of other products and other service offerings and your own resources, and then you can realize it. Kitchen appliances, Foodora, cleaning service, everything that your flat is set up properly. And why does it matter for business? Well, because people will ignore your value proposition. That's why it matters. With Tinder, that's really funny, because the intended value proposition is finding friends, partners, or hookups. The value realization is learn a language, find a new CTO for a health startup, get friends with local guides, recruit employees. People will hack your value proposition. And now you might say, well, but now tell me, how is this working at Rolls-Royce in business to business? I show you. Okay, operators still have to fly the plane and have to maintain the basics of the engine. So that's already value co-creation. But Rolls-Royce makes sure they do so. But even after the, the product lifecycle of an engine ends, and the engine gets taken out of service, surprising new users might be lurking. For example, these people who run mines, be it gold mine or any other mine, that need a big and powerful ventilating machine. So it's always good to see what kind of hacks users use and what other services your product can render as well. Okay, so the customer is always a co-creator of value. Next axiom, axiom 3. All social and economic actors are resource integrators. What does that mean? Well, you know, the common enterprise logic usually makes us feel a bit bad because they tell us, you are a consumer and I am, that's the manufacturing logic, I am the one who creates all the value. I mine the ore, I have my upstream suppliers, and then I take all these precious things and refine it into one thing in my value chain. And because of the fact that in every step of the value chain costs occur, I add value, they mean worth. And then you come, after there was this magic exchange by the invisible hand on the market, which is a topic in itself, and then you come and you destroy the value by using it up. Perfect linear paradigm. Take, make, waste. And when they talk about that, they say, we are smart, knowledgeable, and active. When they talk about us, they say, you are stupid, passive, and an exogenous element to the value-creating system. I'm exaggerating here a bit. What does service logic say? Service logic says, no, the value-creating system is everywhere. Everywhere. And they differentiate 3 levels, a micro level, a meso level, and a macro level. And I will walk you through them now. The micro level basically is the product service ecosystem of the user. So if you think back to the nice dinner evening with your friends, in order to realize the value of the individual value propositions of all these things that you use there, you have to integrate them with other products and services, aka resources. So value propositions are kind of embedded in each other or dependent on each other. For example, if you want to realize the value proposition of a dessert from Kochhaus, then you have to integrate it with lots of other stuff. For example, here you have to prepare it in some kitchen appliances. I don't know how this thing is called. Bowl, in a bowl. So, okay, and also before you're ready to do so, your flat needs, for example, needs to be cleaned. And there you can use your own or others' cleaning skills. Either you do it by self-service, or you use, for example, the app Book a Tiger and book someone who's doing it. You need candles, you also need wine. And for the wine, I mean, how do you choose that? Will you use to choose the wine? Or will you call your dad, who becomes a resource suddenly in your value creation, because he's a wine expert? Will you integrate as a resource your girlfriend and her grandmother's great recipe book, which also becomes a resource because grandma put lots of her knowledge and resources into this book? So you see, this product renders a service as well. So the list goes on. It's basically endless. And also your neighbor who provides the salt and the pepper is an important resource to be integrated. So the sum of the user experience is actually the sum of all combined value propositions of all integrated resources. That makes your experience. And if we zoom out on the meso level, we suddenly see something which we could call the business ecosystem. There are institutions integrated to each other's resources. For example, Martin told me that Foodora is now delivering home packages, which is a cool resource integration. But in order to function, these startups, they all have to make use of other resources as well. The bike messenger, for example. They also need the restaurants. They also need some logistics. They need some IT infrastructure where they could store their data. They are all set up on the usual suspect ecosystems, Android and Apple ecosystem. They need the broadband infrastructure from a mobile telco, and so on. The list goes on. if we zoom out even further, then we are on the macro level. And the macro level describes the governing structures and institutions, like good roads, otherwise the bike messenger wouldn't arrive at time. Laws, a monetary system. So they kind of provide environmental context for the different markets to develop. Other examples would also be street lighting or the cable infrastructure, broadband cable infrastructure, business development programs of the government for startups, you name it. Okay, and then suddenly this, I'm sorry, that's and suddenly this and this is why the axiom says all social and economic actors are resource integrators, because it's all about a nested cascade of resource integration along several levels of abstraction. And it implies that the context of value creation is always networks of networks. So why does this matter? If you look at these networks, at these nested networks, you realize that the customer suddenly becomes a competency of the firm's value proposition, or what Vogue and Lush call the operant resource. You probably have to read that up later, or look it up later on what that actually means. But my point here is, you need empathy and user engagement as a prerequisite for your value proposition's success. And then also, another thing is, your value proposition always sits, how to say, in the different constellations, I had to look it up anyways, in the different constellations of value co-creation spaces. So your firm is often a mere resource participant in this network. And you need knowledge about the value co-creation space, or in other words, about the practices, or how business systems organize themselves. You do that here at the factory probably very well, forming these kind of ecosystems. Otherwise, you cannot achieve contextual fit with your business model. And then your offerings are usually only value unrealized. That means there is a store of potential value which has to be discovered and rendered in context. And this brings us to the last axiom, that the value is always determined by the beneficiary. Just think about the flood and desert again. Common sense says, and I repeat myself here, that our user uses products as intended. He reads the manual, he's happy with our scripted use, and he has the same experience over and over again. In short, the value we propose is also the value we realize. Let's, for example, Miracoli, you all know that, Mamma Miracoli. Problem is idiosyncratic. It's experiential, contextual, and meaning-led. So everything depends on context, and you will have a different experience every time. For this guy, Miracoli is not a family thing. And as this picture is that beautifully chaotic, I would like to draw an analogy to our to our dinner experience. Just think if things went wrong or go wrong with your dinner experience. You have prepared everything perfectly. You have the cool products. You had the cleaning guy coming in from Booker Tiger. Everything's prepared. But then you've chosen the wrong day of the week with your doodle, and no one can come. Damn, value not realized. Or let's assume you use home eat home, and then you've chosen, I don't know, 5 packages, and there's broccoli in there, and then you burned the broccoli because you did not precisely follow the recipe. That means you lacked the knowledge and skills, aka resources, to realize the value. Bam, value not realized. If your friends are too late due to a street lockdown, just think Snowzilla recently in New York, also a problem. And then if the broadband connection gets disrupted, you cannot use Spotify anymore. Or, even worse, you cannot use YouTube, and if your wine opener has got broken, you cannot Google or look in YouTube how you can open a wine bottle without it. So all these problems that suddenly occur, value not realized. So this is why Rolls-Royce, and Rolls-Royce knows that, and looks at these contexts. If you think about if you go back to the philosophy of Rolls-Royce, which is make the customer better, not the product, they know that it's a benefit to interact with the customer, and that you can iterate your value proposition via this interaction. Otherwise, you can't learn and improve the service you provide. So if you examine and maintain and know a possible or a repertoire of possible context scenarios in which, oh no, wait. If you know and maintain a repertoire of possible context scenarios in order to know in which kind of user activities your service and hence your products are embedded in, that's what I wanted to say, snow, desert, no time at the airport to maintain the engine, then you learn. And so then you learn that with snow or desert, you need different maintenance requirements and engine configurations. So some operators might get full service, others only partly half service, because you would support them differently. So you have context-dependent variations of the value realization. And if you also think about that it's always determined by the beneficiary, for example, if you have an emergency case with Rolls-Royce and the emergency team has to fly in, you will have a problem if it's an inexperienced one or a careless emergency team. Then probably the experience will be different than if a senior team flies in. So, you have to kind of know all these scenarios that might happen. Okay. What does that actually mean for you as an organization? I mean, one thing already is, or one of the main takeaways is, okay, there's a big difference between service as services, service activities, packaged units of outcomes, and service singular as a lens. Service singular as a lens is a worldview kind of to view the world of business and economics. So this is something that we should know. And the axioms and the foundational premises of Waage and Lasch, and I just walked you through 4 and very quickly, they help you to develop this service lens in your mind. And this might help you to guide your strategic thinking. And in order to wrap it up a bit more concrete, I took out 3 takeaways. Actually, you can take out lots of takeaways if you read this, if you read their papers and books and all the discussions in the discourse. But the main 3 takeaways for tonight shall be: your customer creates value, not you. You can only humbly be part of their value co-creation and ask to participate there. Value will emerge differently depending on context. Okay, that might be a no-brainer. However, the implications there are interesting. You have to know how your offering gets integrated as one of the user's resources. And you also have to make sure to collaborate in their value co-creation spaces and integrate yourself proactively. That's all the terminology of SD logic. So the key here is collaboration with other parties, be it customers, complementaries, competition, government, education. You have to form learning networks. That's what they say. And last but not least, your customers suddenly become your most precious resource. They would say an operant T resource. And if you think about that, you ask yourself, yeah, it's true. Why aren't they even on the balance sheet? I mean, they're the most value asset a company has. But then you realize, okay, maybe you should take the first step first and ask, okay, why don't we even know them yet? Maybe this is the first start before we put them on the balance sheet, getting to know our customers. Yeah, thank you. Questions now?
Yeah, if there's some emergent questions, we have, I think, like two, 3 questions.
Are there questions after this wild ride?
Well, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, one is, I'm giving you the money to make it sure.
So basically, it's all about about ownership. That the service user is not the owner anymore, and so there come other conditions for the producer.
Am I right? What do you mean by the service user? I mean the user that realizes the value. So formerly we called them consumers.
Ich mach's kurz auf Deutsch.
Ja.
Das Ding ist doch einfach, es geht darum, dass im Endeffekt ändert sich komplett so gewissermaßen das Business, weil der End-User, der kauft jetzt keine CD mehr, sondern es hat den Service Musik. Das heißt, wenn ich jetzt CDs herstelle, habe ich ganz andere Bedingungen, wenn ich mir jetzt einfach wirklich diesen Stream liefere. Oder jetzt auf diesen Red Royals zu kommen, der viel mehr Interesse, dass der Motor viel länger hält und weil ja selbst der Besitzer bleibt, nur den Service bietet.
The last part of the question, I would rather refer to the first part of the question. The question was that it's important to see for the producer that the product kind of renders a service, or it just the product change. Did I get it right? Because I'm not sure. The thing is, I mean, I'm not sure if I answered this question, but the thing is, what I said in the beginning, that forms of products change, but the service they render stays the same. That's one of the key messages, kind of. And if people do not view the product as an entity of competition, which they do all the time because they do feature comparison and all these things, you know, they look at the total. They look at the totally wrong characteristics. Because if they would rather look at the service that gets rendered by different alternative solutions in the market, I call it alternative solutions because the CD-ROM has nothing to do with the stream, then they would see luring dangers of disruption. And disruption is always such a magic word, especially if you talk to a C-level suite. And this is what, for example, can guide your strategic thinking. I don't know if I'm answering the right question here, but that's definitely something where this lens helps.
Hi. At the very beginning, you said something like service design is not like user journeys and this kind of stuff. And then at the very end, the thing I really kind of took away was that you should look at how your business fits in, or how your product fits into the service network of the user. Mm-hmm. And this made me think, but then I really need to understand the user's life situation, what they're doing, what other stuff they're doing, and this seems like kind of user journey stuff. Can you say more? Sure.
Varga and Lush, you know, they are scholars, and they look at these things from a very meta perspective. They start with, which is really interesting, with Adam Smith and how he misunderstood them and so on. So they come from a really high-level theory, and they say, oh yeah, now we've developed this theory over the course of 10, 15 years, and now we need some actionable tools or some mid-range theories, how they call it, and then they also, in the end of their book, they also list some of them, like design thinking, or job to be done thinking, all these things. So they wouldn't know how to do it, but they know, oh, there are some people out there that come from the other direction. They come from the very practical part, and we come from kind of from the blue sky, or from the, So, and that's where we meet right now. And why is it important to meet? Because if you talk to a manager, they always, or let's say to really C-level, big corporates, some of them think very abstract and in economics or in economic terms. And if you reason with them, it's better to reason on a more abstract level than with saying, yeah, here we do it like this. We make a job to be done analyze or something like this, because they say, oh, that's for my product. I don't need this level of detail. No, I want to know why we have to strategize differently. And this might help if you get the attention time of them, which might be a bit tricky.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jan. Before we announce the exercise, because the people all over the world, we have to say goodbye to them, because we're not broadcasting the presentations and so on. So I'd like that all of you guys together with me just say good night and goodbye. So 1, 2, 3. Goodbye. Thank you.
Okay.
If you want to see the results of the next of the exercise, you join the next drinks in Berlin. Sorry.
Cool. So, well, so let's get into hands-on mode. Mauro was earlier this afternoon asking everyone to bring a pen. So you better have a pen. We have some extra pens, but you need a pen. May I have your attention for like further bits, for like 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and then you can like go into groups. And so we're gonna have an exercise. What does it take for people to create value in daily contexts? And what resources needs to be integrated? So it's basically picking up Jan's example of like dining with friends, and we're gonna give you in a second a sheet where you can go through one of these examples by yourself. So I'm just gonna, like, this is the sheet you're gonna get in a second, and I'm just gonna fill it out for you with one example. Example Jan just described. So dinner with friends. So you, as Jan said, you might have your own operant resources, meaning your own mental and sort of physical skills. And one might be, first of all, yeah, your cooking experience, right? So to ensure really that there is a certain quality of the dishes. Another resource you're integrating is your sense for timing, because if you fuck up, if you mess up, yeah, your friends might arrive and the dinner is just like not ready. Then you might have as well, you better have some entertainer qualities as a host to cheer everyone up in case the Spotify goes down. Yeah. Would be good to have some interior taste. I mean, it's quite broad, right? This again becomes an endless list. Just to give you some examples, and as well what Jan said, like the knowledge of, for example, opening a bottle by hand, and then the benefit again would be providing wine without the bottle opener. So then operant resource of the D, so meaning like tools and goods, you might integrate. Well, it's the obvious thing. You might have your pans and pots that are means actually for cooking. You might have the cookbook from the grandmother, for example, that helps you with tips and tricks and inspirations, so this is the main benefit. The gas supply to enable the open to work. Potato peeler, right? That's important. You don't want to do this in a complicated way. And maybe as well some decent lighting in the room to create a bright atmosphere. But then, as Jan mentioned as well, you might integrate other things beyond your own mental and physical skills, and as well beyond tools and goods. And this are other resources. So again, mental physical skills. So it might be actually Doodle, as Jan outlined. So to coordinate everyone's best time of the week. Cleaning service in the moment you don't want to apply your own physical skills and clean yourself. It might be the neighbor to provide not only salt and pepper, but as well maybe olive oil. And PayPal to eventually split the bill for the grocery shopping, and the Kochhaus for providing exotic ingredients. So this is just one example, and you will be getting 3 different examples actually. So your group gonna only have one, and we create little groups instantly by forming groups of 5 people. And in your group, there should be maximum diversity. So it should only contain of people that you do not know. So not the colleagues you arrived with, right? That's pretty easy. People I don't know are my group peers. Okay? Cool. So have a funny time somewhere. Oh no, my time is good. Okay. So we have 20 minutes. Okay. Before we start, I know you guys are super excited about the exercise. Calm down. Okay? Don't run away. I can see you running away that you don't want to do the exercise. I'm really good on like memorizing faces. Okay? I can see you and I remember your face forever. So don't run away. Take your template here with a group of 5 people. You're gonna have 20 minutes to do it up. We're gonna be here to help you out in case you need. Okay? So 20 minutes for now? yeah, we just. Okay.
And he's lucky. Double go. This will be fucking